Hello and welcome to our live stream. I'm going to say that twice because I'm never really sure when we're going live. It's not exactly clear, but I think we are now. Just want to make sure we're live. Yeah, I think we are. So welcome to the live stream. Wherever you are in the world. Again, we're doing it midday Central European time. I'm in Spain. I hope that's not too inconvenient for you. I know it's not going to suit everybody who perhaps are working right now in Europe or whatever, but you can always watch this after the event, of course, on the YouTube channel. You can watch it there. And we always put it out in audio form that you can download on our podcast channel called Short Corners. If you haven't seen that, it's available on all good platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon. It's all there. Short Corners with Peter Windsor. You can get the downloads for our live streams, for my Formula One reports from each race as well. I amalgamate all 3 days or 4 days sometimes into one long podcast, and I'll be doing some other podcasts, and I have done some other podcasts as well on other events, notably the 62 German Grand Prix. Apropos nothing at all. Anyway, welcome again to this live stream. Great to have the opportunity to interact with you, the viewers, and your kind comments over the years, and certainly this year as well. Interesting comments, questions, and I learn a lot too as we go along. So with no more ado, let's have a look and because already there's a whole bunch of comments and questions. So thank you very much for those. Before we do that, I'm going to do one final check just to make sure that everything is looking okay on the live front. Yeah, it says I've been live for 1 minute 39 seconds. Sounds good. Yeah, I think it's all there. I don't want to tempt fate too much, but I think we're getting there anyway. So let me go to, I'm going to bring this up now. That's the chat pop, but at the same time I'm going to bring up the browser so I can see what we're doing on screen and give everybody an opportunity, hopefully, to see what we're all saying. So there we are. Gandalf the Fool, one of our regulars. Thank you very much, Gandalf the Fool. Hello, Peter. Hope you're doing great. Well, that's a relatively straightforward question that I think I can answer, which the answer is yes, I'm doing okay. Thank you very much. I'm doing very well, actually, more than okay. Doing very well. Now I've done extremely well and managed to lose my pop-up chat. Here we go. It's going to get sorted in a minute. You know what it's like. I've been doing a million things today, so I just need to make sure that I'm on the ball. So another one coming up now from Gandalf the Fool. That was his opening gambit, obviously. So we're going to get this one to come up, if I can. Here we go. There we go. Probably go away again now because I've frigged around with it. There we go. Back to getting... It's like warming up the old engine in the car, isn't it? You know, just make sure I got everything right. With the chat. I think there we go. There we go. Gandalf the Fool. During the Chinese Grand Prix, Charles was told by his engineer to hug the inside of turn 7 better so that he has a better entry for turn 8 because he was consistently losing time to Norris. TBC next comment. Okay, let's have a look at the next comment. Yeah, it was an interesting one, that. I'm always slightly dubious about engineers telling the drivers how to drive. But anyway, let's get on to it. Here we go. That's a response to what I've just said, actually. The very next lap, Charles did what the engineer suggested and immediately found 1/10 and a half in turn 7, 8 alone. Thoughts? Well, my thoughts are that Charles... Why does this keep dropping down? I'm so sorry. It keeps... Those who are watching, as distinct from listening, the question I put up goes up and then it disappears again. It's not going to touch anything now. There we are. My thoughts are that Charles is not in the greatest of grooves right now, and he is prone to being affected by the dynamic that's there with Carlos Sainz going as well as he is, and because Carlos is leaving, having to justify really in his new position, which he loves, obviously. You know, he's the chosen one. Lewis is joining. In his mind, he doesn't think Lewis is going to be a major challenge. He might win the odd race or two, but if the car is a race-winning car, Charles believes obviously that he's the guy that's going to take the championship to Ferrari if they have a championship-winning car. And if he didn't believe that, he wouldn't be racing. So that's where he's at. And it's slightly annoying, obviously, that Carlos Sainz is continuing to go pretty well. But at that stage of the race in China, Carlos wasn't really an issue. But all that means that Charles isn't in the smoothest of mental grooves at the moment. And he does stray on occasions, I think. And he's also, I think there was also the issue of proactively creating the great strategy that he was on in Japan and then doing a similar thing in China and it not really working because the car wasn't as quick as the McLaren over the Chinese weekend. And although he was on the same strategy as Lando, it was very difficult for him to do anything about it. So about closing the gap to Lando. So I think he was probably a bit like Lewis sometimes. He was probably sort of playing around a bit with lines and things like that. And I, to me, that sounds like a Jock Clear initiated comment because it would be, what does it say? Hugging the inside, whatever that means. But it could be sort of shortcut for, make sure you get into the corner early and you'll be fine. Don't start doing a later apex there. Don't start going in wider, which you are at the moment. And he may have been doing that because he was following other people or whatever. So in that case, in that instance, good work by the garage and good response by Charles Leclerc. He's not afraid to listen. He's got confidence in the guys in the garage. And I think that's a good sign. Even at a time in the race when he wasn't obviously feeling particularly good because it was getting away from him. So I see that as a positive, actually. They knew what they were talking about in the garage, which is unusual. Engineers talk about get into the apex. Your minimum speed is too low, or you need to brake a bit later here. They're just looking at numbers and comparing it with a teammate. But I think in the case of Ferrari, I think they do know what they're talking about. So I think that's good. So thank you for that, Gandalf. Very good. This is from Mia, who says hi. Thank you very much, Mia. That's nothing more from here. We've got a super chat coming in, which I'll have a look at. Vinny the D. I wonder if it's the Vinny I know. Probably isn't. But anyway, thank you very much, Vinny. Don't know if you answered this last week, but do you think a multiple engine formula like the 90s and multiple tyre suppliers would help instead of the active aero? Well, we do have multiple engines in Formula One, don't we? So if Andretti had no engine and was coming into Formula One, they would be in a position maybe to persuade Renault to sell them an engine, or maybe Honda. So we do have that. I certainly would love to see more than one tyre company in Formula One. We've talked about this, but no problem talking about it again. There's no doubt that when we have tyre competition, when we've had tyre competition in Formula One, it's produced more testing, more tyre testing, more dramatic qualifying tyres that are really good. And sometimes, we have the regulations we have, the mandatory pit stop, in order to make life as easy as possible for Pirelli. So in theory, and I say in theory because once speed bumps are down on a road, very rarely are they lifted off the road again when the government is satisfied that everybody's driving more safely. Nothing ever goes... Once you go in a retrograde step in life, very rarely, bureaucratically, does it go back again. And I think it's unlikely we'll ever probably have a Formula One without mandatory pit stops now. But it'd be nice to think that if we're back in a situation where we had, say, Michelin and Pirelli, or Pirelli and Goodyear, or whatever it was, that they'd get rid of the mandatory pit stop and one of them would be able to start building tyres that would do a Grand Prix distance, which would be a good thing, I believe. And I really miss that. And I miss the freedom of knowledge of what we're doing with the tyre companies as well, because you could always talk to Goodyear or to Michelin or to Pirelli when they were in competition and find out exactly what compounds they're using and what development they're using, production systems and so forth. But you can't do that now because it's one tyre supplier and all the teams have to, sign a contract of confidentiality and everything else. So, yeah, I'd love to see that. Instead of active aero, I still don't see active aero as being something other than we got to keep pace with modern technology, and Formula One needs to be seen on the cutting edge. For me, with the next generation of cars, it's much more important to try to make sure that we go to smaller, more nimble, lighter Formula One cars. And if they're going to go to 50% electrification, that's a big job. That's a really big job to achieve any sort of reduction in mass, particularly with the big batteries. So it's to me, I'm not thinking that much about the active arrow, to be honest, as something that's going to really change the world. But maybe it is. Maybe I haven't been paying enough attention to that. But anyway, thanks for that question. Very good. Okay. Hello, Peter. This is from K Bands. Hello, Peter. What is your stance on Sainz going for a long-term position at Mercedes? I'm of the opinion that he beats George Russell over a season and the Kimi kid isn't ready yet. Well, I don't even know if that's an option that Carlos has got at Mercedes. For all the noise we hear from Toto Wolff is that he's totally committed to the George Russell, Kimi, Antonelli future in terms of the Mercedes lineup. Doesn't seem to be any change in that. Carlos at the moment, for sure, is just waiting to see if the situation changes in some way and there's an opening in one of the, what he would think in his own mind is to be one of the top teams for 24 and beyond. And if it's a top team and he can do a long-term contract, why wouldn't he? Of course he would. If Mercedes say to him, we're going to run Antonelli in 26, but you've got the ride in 25, if he's got nothing else, he'll probably take it, I guess. It won't be a very comfortable year for him just to get in there very quickly and have to learn the team, the engineers, the system, all of which George knows, of course, and is completely familiar with. And George isn't slow. So it'd be very difficult for Carlos to get into that new team and in 1 year blow George Russell away. I mean, as you say, he might, if he was there over a 2 or 3 year period, he might, but I doubt that, to be honest. But I'm not saying he wouldn't be quick and he wouldn't win races if it was a race winning car. I'm just saying to actually beat George over a season wouldn't be that easy. But in 1 year, it would be very difficult and be difficult for everybody because Mercedes wouldn't want to give him a lot of information because they know he's leaving and potentially going to Audi or wherever he was going to go. And so it wouldn't be a proper relationship anyway. So from Carlos's point of view, obviously he wants a long-term deal with a top team. And he's going to sit it out as long as he can to see if that option eventuates. And it may be at Red Bull, it may be at Mercedes, maybe at Aston Martin. Something might happen. I don't want to spell it out, but obviously at some point maybe a driver might be sidelined or something and there might be an opportunity. That's all Carlos is doing right now, waiting. I think the only real option he's got that potentially, if he had to sign a contract tomorrow, would be Audi, and having to write off 25 in a Sauber where he's not going to be very quick, which would be soul destroying for him because he's got the momentum, he's driving well. Yes, he made that mistake in qualifying in China, but what a recovery. I mean, it could easily have resulted in Carlos, A, not getting out at all and qualifying at the back, or it could have resulted in getting out and leaving a lot of margin and not being very quick because he just had a bit of a shunt and didn't want to make a mess of it. Don't forget that Giovinazzi actually did the same shunt twice, didn't he, when he went off there. It's quite an easy mistake to make if you drive like Carlos. And I'm not saying he drove badly, but I mean, if you're leaning on the car as much as he does on exit, compared with, say, Fernando, who gets the car a little bit straighter at rotation, and he's got a squarer car when he gets to exit. He hasn't got as much lateral load on it. He just ran out of road, whereas Carlos has got lateral load as well as running out of road. So that's why he spun. And so it began at the beginning of the corner, not just in the sort of reflex action thing. And having made that mistake, I was thinking, wow, it'll be really interesting to see how Carlos recovers from this now. And bang, he was right there, almost doing a Charles Leclerc soft tire run lap time. Very impressive. That was really, and that was one of those impressive things I've seen, actually. Since Nigel Mansell did a 360 on the straight when he was forced off onto the grass by Gerhard Berger in the 1990 San Marino Grand Prix in top gear, and rejoined, and then set his own personal fastest lap the following lap. Yeah, good stuff. So anyway, just K Bands is following that up, saying, do you think Mercedes is a viable option? And, well, it's a viable option if they offer him the long-term drive. I'm not sure it's a viable option if it's only a 1 year offer. I suppose he'll take it because it's still better than doing a year with Sauber, and he'll think, well, maybe something else will happen between now and then, and at least I'm in a car that's potentially able maybe to win a Grand Prix. That's asking quite a lot in a Mercedes, of course, these days, but anyway. Alessandro Durango says, hi Peter, a lot of criticism about Xavier Marcos. I'm definitely not a fan, but I also think that being a race engineer is not easy, and finding a perfect replacement is probably difficult and needs time. Yeah, I think the race engineer's job in general is quite confusing now, because there's no such thing as a race engineer anymore. You're a performance engineer, or you're this engineer, or you're that engineer, or you're on a specific car, on a specific part of the performance curve. And beyond that, there's a lot of data that they can look at. And the skill of a race engineer is to put the fingers in the air and just feel what is really going on, and what is important and what is unimportant. And as I said earlier, when we were talking about the messages to Charles about turn 7, that some engineers can look at telemetry and come to a conclusion which will be factually correct, digitally correct, but won't actually be correct in terms of what the driver needs to know, given the way he drives and the style that he has. And I think there's still a big disconnect between what race engineers demand of data and what the drivers are actually needing to know in the cockpit. In other words, I don't think the engineers make enough allowance for the way the drivers actually use the throttle, the brakes and the steering. And every driver uses them differently in different ways. And that's not factored in to the data. So there is that disconnect. And the skill is in being aware of that and knowing your drivers. And I keep banging on about it, and I'm sorry if people are bored by it, but that is what makes Adrian Newey so good. He's more than just an aerodynamicist. He's more than just a designer. He's more than an engineer on the pit wall. He's a race engineer as well, who cut his teeth with Christian Danner's Formula 2 March, and then at Indy, running race cars at Indy. And that's really cutting your teeth as a in-the-field race engineer. And that's still what I think probably is the lifeblood of Adrian Newey. What he probably enjoys doing more than anything else is actually running that car in the race. And he's got fabulous feel, not only for Max, but also for Sergio Perez, and getting the best from Perez and what he needs in the car as well. And I'm not sure that all the race engineers in the pit lane have that skill and that knowledge and that road dust, if that's the right word. So yeah, it's a good point. We don't talk about race engineers very much, and I have said several times, have I not, in various live streams, that the next step from the Netflix thing is to start doing a proper Netflix behind the scenes show about the race engineers, about the designers back at base, about the motorhomers, about the physios. All the different parts of the family all should have their own show. And because that's what Formula One is. It's a massive tapestry of life in every dimension. And at the moment we just get the sort of the stuff at the top, and it's fairly contrived anyway. But there's so much interesting information and content out there that's unused and untapped. And people said to me, I can't remember if it was yesterday, maybe I was doing something with Cameron, or it might have been earlier, if we didn't have sprint, well, I was saying get rid of sprint races, and I was saying what I would do to spice it up. I would have a lot more background footage and knowledge and understanding and content on the real Formula One, whether it be drivers' briefings, debriefs, whether it be the engineers, whether it be the designers. You'd get into it and you'd make sure that you had access to it in a way that worked for the public. Obviously, you have to protect the secrets of the teams, but that's what good TV production is all about, knowing where to draw the line and where not to draw the line, and good journalism, as a matter of fact. Portrait Mailer, interesting name. Hi Peter, if you were a driver, what would be your favourite track and why? All the best from South Africa, my friends, and I love the live chats. Well, I'd love to say Kyalami, but to be honest with you, I think I'd be a bit scared of Kyalami if I was a driver. Not scared, I hope I wouldn't be scared. I wouldn't be racing if I was scared, but I would be a bit nervous about the high speed stuff there now, and the Juxkai sweeps and that long straight. And I've just, so many things have happened at Carl. Well, I'm thinking of the old Kyle Army, of course, aren't I? So yeah, I should make allowances for the new Kyle Army. And I say, hard to beat Kyle Army as a venue, that's for sure. South Africa. East London always captured my imagination, those shots of East London when it was staging the World Championship Grand Prix, and the ocean in the background, Indian Ocean, I think, yeah, must be, and just beautiful, the sea breeze, the crosswinds, the whole blue sky, the fans, just looked like Australia to me, dare I say it. So that probably would have been one of my favourite, I guess, East London. But let's talk about today's tracks. It's a good one, isn't it? It wouldn't be Melbourne. I quite like Bahrain actually as a layout. I think if I was a race driver, I'd quite like Bahrain. I think I'd love that 9-10 section, and I'd love those quick corners towards the end of the lap. I'm not sure I'd like those sort of 90s. They're a bit boring, aren't they, at the end of the lap? Silverstone, yeah, I think I could get into Silverstone. Have got into Silverstone periodically in various automobiles. Not this Grand Prix one, but parts of it. And then where else would I go? I don't know. I'd love to race at Monaco. I wouldn't really like to race a Formula One car at Monaco though. I'd love to race a Formula Renault at Monaco. Not that they have them anymore, but that to me was the perfect size car for Monte Carlo. And yeah, Interlagos. I'd love to race in Interlagos would be the other one. Anything undulating really. Not Spa. Well, Spa. Yeah, Spa. Yeah, I could get into Spa. I did a race at Spa in the European Mini Challenge a few years ago. Had a massive shunt at Blanchimont, which I was embarrassed about at the time. But then I saw Nico Rosberg doing exactly the same thing at Barcelona the following winter in the test. And I thought, oh, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And basically the track it had been raining. There was a dry groove. And I didn't go off track, but through Blanchimont, I just touched the exit curb of Blanchimont and it just flicked the car sideways like that. And I went head on into the barrier on the left. So the actual hands thing was actually stretched. I was quite impressed by that. Bernie wasn't too impressed because I took out the connection to the one of the important connections to the the world feed, and they delayed everything for a couple of hours. I think cancelled something or other, cancelled the drivers' parade or something, all because of Windsor. And it was a shame because I was a guest in that race and I wasn't eligible for points. So I'd qualified. I don't know. I think I qualified midfield, I will say, but I had to start at the back of the grid because I wasn't able to score points. And I was following this other guy he'd had a problem, but he was quite quick. So the two of us just going through the field, and I think I could have had a reasonable result. But anyway, I made that mistake. So there we go. I was right behind another car, so I didn't have a lot of vision. I was just looking at his rear. Anyway, get on with it. Stop talking about all that rubbish, Windsor. Get on with the real stuff. Row. In the 80s, did a flat spot occur often? And if it did so, did it completely ruin one's race since pit stops were not compulsory? No, it didn't. And we're talking, well, the 80s, yes, sorry. 80s definitely. I was suddenly thinking pre-slicks. In the pre-slick era, the compounds were sufficiently hard with the treads there that you could lock up and it wouldn't eat away a square section of the tyre. But in the 80s, oh yeah, you had lockups then and it had flat spots. And yeah, I mean, if you think about Nigel Mansell, 87 Silverstone British Grand Prix, making that pit stop, you got a tyre vibration. It may have been a wheel weight or something coming off, but it got worse and worse, which suggests that it was maybe it had a lockup. And we brought him in. I was with the team at the time, and we brought him in and changed all four tyres. Took about 9 seconds, as it would in those days. We didn't have the wheel nuts in the rims, of course. And he went on to win the race. So yeah, I mean that was before compulsory pit stops. So flat spots definitely occurred, and they did often mean that you had to come into the pits and change tyres. Took a long time too. Nippy Moto says Alex Albon said that Max's setup was eye-wateringly sharp. What is it that Max is feeling that allows him to drive like this and others not? He's feeling the surface of the road, and the fact that Alex Albon can see that and talks about that suggests that he too feels the surface of the road, and he's got enormous sensitivity as well. And that says a lot about Albon, I think, that he is able to observe these things. And Piastri's another guy that's quite self-critical like that. And yeah, what Max is feeling is eye-wateringly sharp. He's feeling every minute change that the variables are throwing at him. And I got to say here, that's Max, and that's Max in the Red Bull RB20 as we see him today. But that's also Jim Clark in a Lotus 33. It's also Jackie Stewart in a Tyrrell 003. It's also Mario Andretti in a Lotus 79. It's also Michael Schumacher in a 2002 Ferrari. It's also Sebastian Vettel in a Red Bull in 09. You know, it's a lot of great drivers feeling in harmony with the surface of the road, and everything's happening in slow motion. And that's what Alex isn't saying there. He isn't saying, and this is something that you can feel and almost touch when everything is happening in slow motion, and it's all in its own time and in its own rhythm. And that's something not unique to Formula One. That's something that a lot of athletes and a lot of sportsmen, often great ones, often achieve. It's in the golf equivalent is when the hole is suddenly 3 times the size that it actually is. It seems to be 3 times the size. And it's the same in Formula One. Everything happens in slow motion when you're in that zone. And as Carlos Reutemann once memorably said, I'm seeing the exit of the corner before I've even turned into the corner. That's when he knew he was in that zone and that rhythm. And that's when he would also have felt eye-wateringly sharp in terms of sensitivity and changes that can be made. Nigel Mansell, 92, Lotus Williams FW14B, coming onto the grid at the British Grand Prix and asking for half a pound less on the left front. And it's those details that you do feel at that level. And all I'm doing is putting Max's current state of nirvana in its correct context, which is the same context as Juan Manuel Fangio in a Ferrari 250F around Rouen, for sure, would have been feeling every cobblestone as well as he went over it. Yeah, but good for Alex Albon that he appreciates that and talks about it, because not many drivers do these days, in my opinion, or my experience. Nippy Moto again, continuing. Back when Formula One had the H-pattern manual gear shifts, do you know if the drivers were clutchless up and down shifting? If so, I'd imagine they would have been left foot braking as well. No, they certainly weren't left foot braking with an H pattern. They were all, you had to use the clutch with your left foot, so you couldn't in any way use your left foot on the brake. But it's an interesting point you make, because on upshifts, I remember talking to Terry Boutsen once, and when he had an H pattern in the arrows, and he's saying that he was telling me that he didn't use the clutch for the first part of the upshift. He only used it from neutral to the next gear, because he was very good at, so he had great coordination, very good gear change, and we were talking about it. But on downshifts, I don't think, maybe they would knock it into neutral sometimes, and then the clutch from the neutral into the lower gear. The key, though, was always to have the revs absolutely perfect, because you didn't have the engine management to do the revs for you, and you were heel and toeing. So in other words, you had your toe on the brakes and your heel on the throttle, and the relationship between the brake and the throttle was a really big deal in terms of your ability to perfectly heel and toe. And a lot of time was spent on that footwell area design. And I often glibly say, as many others do, I guess, oh, well, you know, he had the use of the spare car and he jumped into the spare car. And I've told a story on this about the 1980 Dutch Grand Prix, when Nigel Mansell was unable to qualify the 81B undrivable car, and Colin Chapman put him into Elio's car with one set of qualifying tyres with 10 minutes to go, and the footwell area was set up for Elio. They'd put Nigel's seat in, but he still had Elio's pedals. And what that means is that it was perfectly set up for Elio De Angelis's legs, the way he sat in the cockpit, his knee bend, and then the position in which he had his foot on the brake and the throttle, given the shoes that he was wearing and the size of his feet, and the pedal pressures that were required. And it was a big thing to use somebody else's footwell area and pedals, because the heel and toe thing was a really personal thing that you had to get absolutely right. And Nigel did a great job that day with Elio's pedals. And that's an art, of course, that's gone now from Formula One. It's been replaced by others, which you could say come under the heading of management of all the stuff on the steering wheel and being a sort of a scientist stroke IT expert as well as a racing driver. But that art of heel and toeing and braking at exactly the right rate in and out of the brake pedal and getting the revs exactly right at exactly the right moment for the downshift was very, very difficult. I'd say, I've said this before, Michele Alboreto, Ayrton Senna. I'd have to put Carlos in there because I think he was right up there with them. They would be three that I would mention and Nigel was not far away, nor was Alan Prost. Prost was also in that era. So, and he was really good actually, if I think about it. Yeah, Prost too, you'd have to put in. Almost seamless and perfect use of the throttle and the brakes and in terms of those downshifts. And it's quite interesting because Rob Wilson still prefers to do his coaching in a manual shift car. And of course, a lot of the young guys that come to him now have never driven with a foot clutch, ever. All they've ever driven is a 2-pedal car with paddles. And they say, well, why do I have to do this? What's this all about? It's going to take me half a day to learn how to do this. And Rob says, well, the reason that it's important to do the H-pattern downshift and to heel and toe well is that it gives you a native feel for eliminating lumps and bumps in your driving and to make every gear shift perfect, lump-free gear shift. And it's a really important skill. And when you master that, you then become even more sensitive to all the other lumps and bumps in your driving. Good point, actually. It's a sort of extension of Rob Wilson's philosophy that it's better to use a dictionary than Wikipedia because on the way to finding the word in the dictionary, you happen to bump into 2 or 3 other interesting words that you read about, whereas Wikipedia takes you zonk straight to the word. A little bit like that, in terms of using an H-pattern gearbox and having to perfect your gear changing, you then along the way see a couple of other things that you didn't have quite right in your driving. Good philosophy, I think. Rao, what is it that Lando does during the race that Oscar struggles with? Why can't Oscar just mimic Lando's... Oh, sorry about this. Got a... it says suspected spam caller. There you go. It's quite good technology, isn't it? First of all, I'll put it on mute, and then... Well, I'll go away. I was thinking a lot about this, because... I've got quite excited about Oscar Piastri ever since he's been at McLaren and the way he drives. And he does seem at the moment to be in a position where he's not... He gets to a certain point where he's very near Lando, and then Lando either just gets a little bit away in qualifying or they're pretty near in the race, and then as the race goes on, strategy, whatever it is, Oscar has problems. I don't know. Let's not read too much into it at the moment, because in China, he did get shunted up the rear, didn't he? And he got a lot of damage, and so you could argue, in beating Lewis, holding off Lewis with a damaged McLaren, he did pretty well. But you're right. He wasn't up there with Lando, and you would have thought, for example, in the sprint race when Lando had that drama on the first corner, that was a moment for Oscar to step up and suddenly be Jackie Stewart to Graham Hill in BRM 65, but he didn't and hasn't. I can't really say, to be honest, because to my eye, he definitely has a feel for getting into the corner earlier than Lando, and he has the sensitivity and the suppleness to be able to do that. And it's not an easy thing to do, as I've explained many times, and he does have that. He looks, his transitions are really nice in terms of going from straight line into the initial steering. He doesn't seem to make a lot of mistakes out there on his own. So he's, I have to say, I don't know what's going on at the moment. It's a bit odd. Well, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see over the next few races. It's funny, isn't it? A number of people coming out of the woodwork saying, Lando's suddenly ready to win a world championship, all the rest of it. I mean, he's looked good for ever since he out-qualified Carlos Sainz at McLaren, didn't he? That was the year for me that Lando really showed that he could be not only a Grand Prix winner, but go on to win a world championship. So he's been in that zone for a long time. It's just a question of getting better and better, more and more experience, learning to work as he is in this new senior position in the team, even though he's still a young gun. And he's doing a really good job with that. But in terms of being ready, he's been ready for a couple of years now, Lando. So it's quite amusing to see all these people going on about it right now. And, you know, Lando, you only had to go watch him at Po in a Formula 3 race in Euro F3 to know how classically brilliant he was and how good he was going to be in his career. I mean, he's just that driver still. Nippy Moto. I was absolutely shocked in 21 when Lewis was off to fashion shows while Max was grinding and working hard. Max lives and breathes racing, and that's why he's able to dominate the way he is today. Well, I think what you say about Max's philosophy is absolutely correct. He is a pure racer. He's not really interested in anything else, is he? Which is great. Well, he probably is, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. And he's just, he loves to simplify his racing and just get down to what really matters and what's always worked for him in karting and Formula 3 and now Formula 1. And he just keeps things simple and straightforward. He doesn't talk too much about it and just gets on with it. And that's brilliant. And he's complemented by being in a great team which has produced the best car in Formula 1, and he's getting the best from that car. So everything is working well, and his philosophy is brilliant. I personally think Lewis's philosophy is great as well, because he's a completely different driver to Max in the sense that he's won 7 world championships, and he's been in Formula 1 since 2007, for Pete's sake. And you think of the other drivers that have won championships over a long period of time, and whether or not they've managed to sustain a level of performance that's right up there with their best days, and B, a motivation to want to keep racing anyway, given the fame and the money and everything else that comes from success. And Lewis has done that really well. And I've said several times on these live streams, you know, I don't know Lewis, I don't follow him away from the racetrack. I don't follow him on social media. I only see him as a racing driver. But all I can conclude is that whatever he's doing away from the racetrack works really well for him, because he's basically still hungry as a dog and wants to win more world championships. And that's great for somebody with that amount of stuff now that they've done. So I don't think you can compare the two and say, oh, that's why Max is winning races and Lewis isn't. Obviously, it's to do with the car and the team and everything else. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Lewis's... Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with the way Lewis runs his life in terms of what it means for his racing. Fashion shows, I don't know. I mean, they do have quite a big deal with Tommy Hilfiger, do they not? I think they still do at Mercedes. So maybe it was working with Hilfiger doing all that stuff. I don't know. And maybe Red Bull have a much tighter rein on... No, I wouldn't have said that. I would just say, you know, Max probably says, no, don't want to do it. I'm just going to go home and do some karting and sorry, forget it. Whereas Lewis says, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm going to do some stuff with Tommy Hilfiger. Enjoy it. If that's what he needs in order to get his brain sorted for the next race, then I don't have a problem with that myself. I think whatever Lewis is on, I think he's doing a pretty good job, and I want some of it. Same questioner, Nippy Moto. Even though Lewis had the dominant car for 8 years, he couldn't do what Max is doing today. Well, no, because he didn't have the dominant car that Max has today in the dominant team. He had quite serious opposition, from a teammate from time to time, whether it be Bottas, whether it be Nico Rosberg, obviously. And also, he had pretty good opposition from other teams as well. Whereas today, Red Bull have a clear advantage, which they've created over everybody else. So there's no comparison in my opinion, between Lewis's winning years at Mercedes and Max's winning years now. I'm not in any way denigrating Max's achievements at all. All I'm saying is that the difference between Red Bull and the opposition today is very different and much bigger than the difference between Mercedes and the opposition. I'm not saying the Mercedes didn't have a good team and a good car, but on any given day, there was usually one team out there, whether it be Ferrari, whether it be Red Bull, whatever, who could who could get near them. The era in which Lewis was winning was not all about ground effect and making good use of ground effect and minimizing bouncing. It was about a lot of other things as well. It was about engines. It was about aero, but it was different aero. It was wings, and it was the downforces being generated by other parts of the car. So on any given day, it wasn't impossible for other teams to suddenly get quite near Mercedes and they'd fall away again. But here, with this one, Adrian Newey's done such a good job with Max that the superiority is just incredible. The nearest I can talk to about this would be Lotus 79 in 1978, maybe, and then Mercedes in 55 would be the nearest comparisons to where we are today with what Red Bull are achieving. Victor Rodriguez. Hi, Peter. More on Alex Albon. Albon said that Max likes his car extremely sensitive in the front with no regard for the rear. He said that Max is the only one crazy enough to do that because he's like driving on ice. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think, as I said before on these live streams, any great Grand Prix driver that I've been lucky enough to talk to in detail has always said to me, all they've ever wanted is a plugged front end. All they need is a front end. They can handle the rest of it. From James Hunt to Mario Andretti to Carlos Reutemann to Nigel Mansell to Michael Schumacher to whoever, you name it. Jim Clark actually mentions that in his book. And that's what Albon's talking about there. And there's nothing new there. You know, anybody that doesn't want a plug front end is somebody who wants a neutral car, and they're going to be a bit wishy-washy in the way they drive. If you've got a front end, you can do whatever you like. Fernando Alonso, another one. You know, he wants a front end. He can handle a rear. It's no problem at all, as we saw in China. So that Albon makes a big deal about that, that's slightly worrying because it suggests that he isn't like that, I suppose. And if Alex doesn't want a really good front end, what does he want? You know, that's when you get confused, I think, because any great racing driver who knows his stuff and has a feel all they want is the front to work. I'm being slightly over the top there, saying all they want. Of course they want great traction. Of course they want a back end that's predictable. But at the bottom line, if they've got a front end, then they can manipulate the car. If you don't have a front end and you just got understeer, it's very difficult to be quick. You can balance it with the throttle and the brakes, you can do all those things and protect the tires better than other drivers. But it's difficult to be quick if you've got a terrible front end on the car. And Victor continues, Albon said that having Max as a teammate can make you doubt yourself because he finds tenths in a lap time and you try to match him and then you go off for a mistake. Can you expand? Yeah, I can. And I think that's a bit disappointing because because Albon has done some days with Rob Wilson now, and he should know by now that if you are a longish corner driver, as Alex Albon is, and because therefore you have to rely more on braking late and getting the power on early and making sure you got a high minimum mid-corner speed, all of those things leave very little margin for error. And if you get them right, you're super quick. But if you get them wrong, you're braking a little bit too late, you're going to lock up an inside front, the back end's going to go, something's going to happen, the car's just going to be unstable, it's going to be a little bit later getting on the power, you might get on the power a little bit too aggressively too soon to compensate, whatever it is, all those things come into play. And that's what he means. Whereas Max is, because he drives down to a rotation point where he's got everything very supple and he's manipulating the car, trying to just tell it what to do next, and he's feeling all the variables as they come into play. Yeah, that little bump, I didn't feel that yet last lap. The left rear's got a little bit more slippery, I need to compensate. Because he's got more room to maneuver because he's keeping the car more or less square all the time. Whereas Alex Albon isn't. He's leaning on the car much more, as Carlos Sainz does. And that's what he's talking about there. Makes you doubt yourself. Of course it makes you doubt yourself. What it shouldn't make you doubt yourself. What it should do is make you think, I'm going to try and do what he's doing. I've got the touch and feel. I'm going to start doing what Max does. And I think that's what Piastri is trying to do. And maybe that's why he's in a bit of a trough at the moment, because he's a bit confused and it's not working out quite as well. But if he keeps at it, it'll work for sure. It won't happen overnight, ever. And that's, and he's been privileged to be alongside Alex Albon, and he's privileged to have done days with Rob. He should know by now that the key to this is to start manipulating the car more and being on top of it rather than reacting to the car when it does something. And I think it was the last race, actually, didn't we? Where Albon said something like, the car's on a knife edge or something like that. And that's because that's the way he drives it. I'm not saying the Williams isn't on a knife edge, it is. But if you put Max into the Williams, this knife-edgy Williams, for sure he would be able to make the edges of the telemetry a little bit smoother and a little bit rounder. It wouldn't be as spiky. The car would sit squarer to the road when he's making his manipulation of it. And that's the difference. He wouldn't be a second a lap quicker than Alex Albon in a Williams, no way. But over a 5-lap period, he might be 0.2 quicker over the total amount, or 0.3, making fewer errors. That's what would happen. And that's what Alex is talking about. And it's, having been quite encouraged by the first comment he made, I'm slightly depressed by the last one, because it suggests that Albon thinks that Max has got this special magical thing that he does, which can demoralize everybody else. Well, it isn't. It's get on with it. You can do it. It just requires hard work and application, and probably not reading the telemetry too much and getting on with it and doing some proper days with Rob. So that's my reaction to that. Boom. This is BNNT. Question: did you ever cross paths with Henry Toivonen? He seems he was very capable in road as well as off-road. No, I never did. Pauli Toivonen, his father, was one of my... I had a picture of Pauli in his... I'm going to say it was a small Lancia, I think, when he was rallying, and then Henry came along. And I kept in touch with Henry Toivonen, funnily enough, through my very close friendship with David Hunt, James's younger brother, who I met when he was racing Formula Ford, and I kind of helped him as much as I could with sponsorship and finding sponsors, and was close to him throughout his life. Sadly, he passed away relatively recently. But David Hunt was the world's greatest Henry Toivonen fan. And every rally Henry did, David Hunt was watching on TV or reading about it and giving me updates the whole time. He was completely in awe of Henry Toivonen. So, yeah, very sad loss. Incredibly talented driver. I think he could have been... David always said to me, this guy for sure would be super quick in Formula One. And there's no reason to doubt that at all, really. So what days they were for rallying, eh? Those super quick cars. He was in a Lancia, I think, wasn't he? And yeah, I think it was. And still love rallying, though. As I say, I'm going to the Rally of Portugal in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to that. Be interested to see what it's like now. I'm going to go to the special stage in the evening, obviously, but I'm going to go out into the mountains as well and have a look, sniff the air there too. Right, Dr. Kazabubu. Hi, Peter. If manufacturers are interested in the technology aspect of Formula One, i.e. PU-related stuff, why don't we go back to 0913 regs in terms of car size, weight, accounting for safety? And two, and the new engine formula, 0913 was arguably the best Formula One era in terms of racing action and breathtaking championships. Yeah, well, reliability and the parity of the engines. That's absolutely without saying. The V10, V8s, and they were reliable. They were relatively cheap, about 12 million for the package deal for the year from any supplier, and super reliable. And it all got changed. It went to the hybrid engines. The price went up to 25, 26 million or something for a year. They were much less reliable and required much more stuff around the car, which made the cars bigger and heavier. I know where you're coming from, but you try talking to all the people that say it's very good for Formula One to be seen to be at the cutting edge of hybrid technology, and we can't ignore it. We can't go back to fuel guzzling, high revving, screaming Formula One engines. It's the old argument of, is Formula One a show for the fans, or is it a technology pathway for the automobile industry and Wall Street and the City of London to spend a lot of money on? That's the real crutch of it all. Crux. Bernie and Liberty, with their TV rights deals and the money they get from TV rights, would argue on the side probably of the show. The teams would probably argue on the side of the technology, because they like to be seen as the pioneers of technology, and without thinking too much about the show, assuming they're still getting their bills paid by somebody. So, it's a question of where you sit, really. And my main criticism of Formula One is that it does like to call itself the cutting edge of technology. It's the DNA of Formula One. And yet Formula One does very, very little to sell its technology to the general public, and we don't get to see it. It's all hidden behind garage doors. We're not allowed to ask any questions about it. When a car stops, it's a technical problem. They never explain what the issue is. And when a car's slow, they never say what the issue is. They say, oh, well, we expect it to be slow at this track or whatever, some cliche like that. And that's my, I think the technology story is just as interesting as the driver story and the engineering story and all the other stories. And I'd love to know, well, we'd all love to know, wouldn't we, what goes on in a Mercedes debrief, really goes on, and not the stuff they put out on YouTube, but the stuff that really is talked about in a debrief after a race about where they're going with that car and what the problems are. And that's what it's all about. And we don't get to know any of that. And I say that because I'm probably one of the few left who can actually remember the days when you could phone Derek Gardner or Colin Chapman or Harvey Postlethwaite or Mauro Foghieri and say, why did that left rear bottom wishbone break? What was the cause? Were you running a different material in the bolt? Was the bolt a different gauge? Did he go over a bump? What was it? And they would give you a straight answer. And the reason they would give you a straight answer is because they felt that if the press knew the truth and precisely what was going on, they would do a better job of reporting Formula One, and Formula One would therefore be more appealing to the public. But today they think, oh no, we can't talk about that, secret, can't tell you, no, nothing, can't tell you anything at all, even though they want to say that we're at the cutting edge of technology. It just doesn't, it's completely insane in my view, the way the dichotomy there is ridiculous. And I'm kind of going off at a slight tangent, but I'm just saying to you, you're absolutely right, Dr. Casabubo. But the problem is that Formula One has to be seen to be going the hybrid era, electrification, don't you? Arsène Martin. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts on Théo Pourchaire in Indy, yet another Formula 2 champion who's been denied a seat in Formula 1? I think it's like every day I think about Théo Pourchaire and how talented he is, and Felipe Drugovich and a whole lot of others, and how they're just sitting there doing nothing, and Formula One is doing nothing for the young drivers who should be in racing there. And it's completely ridiculous, and it breaks my heart, actually. It always has. This whole business of a young driver with talent never being given the opportunity to show his talent is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of motorsport. And you'd like to think that with all the improvements that we've seen in Formula One over the last 10 years, the Netflix show, expansion in America, more money, more races, everything's bigger and better. You'd like to think that there'll be a better path now for younger drivers to get into Formula One, particularly if they're from countries that are important to Formula One. And I keep saying it, Felipe Drugovich. He's Brazilian, for Pete's sake. We need a Brazilian driver in Formula One. He's quick. He's talented. He's doing nothing. And he's going to end up at IndyCar probably, or World Endurance, or Formula E or something. And it's ridiculous. I mean, Théo Pourchaire is in a slightly different position because I suspect he's still on the list of potential drivers for Audi when they come into Formula One 26 and beyond. I think he's still under his contract with Sauber Academy. And to be doing IndyCar between now and then is no bad thing. He's racing, at least he's out there, at least he's doing what he's doing. But it's not good. The solution is to have more cars on the grid, obviously, potentially to look at what I was saying, I have said many times, potentially to allow teams to run a third car which doesn't score points for a local hero to do something. Or a much better solution than both of those is to have a second championship below Formula One, which is based on racetracks and countries that are not yet in the Formula One calendar but want to be, either in the waiting list or they don't have the money yet, but if they have this race it might help them raise the money to be a full championship contender in those sorts of countries, whether it be Argentina, Colombia, South Africa, India, whatever it is, and Vietnam, and have races there. Get that going, get the interest in there, and have that for this second division Formula One Championship, which is for last year's cars or anything but this year's cars, and it's for young drivers on the way up. If they've raced Formula 2 and now they've got some budget perhaps to take into Formula 1. It should have its own TV coverage, it should have its own income, its own sponsorship systems, rights systems. It should be owned by Formula 1 and it should be part of Formula 1's platform. That's what I think we should have. It'd be good for the circuits, good for the countries, and certainly good for the drivers. And don't forget the teams would be good for them too, because they could make money out of it. And anyway, they use a lot of their old cars for testing anyway, don't they? So there's no downside to none of it. So yeah, that's what I would do. Rather than have Teo Pusher have to go off and do IndyCar, or Liam Lawson, another one, go off to Japan. Have these guys in a championship where we can all watch them, and Formula 1 is endorsing it, if you like, and it's looking like a mini Formula 1 Grand Prix. What's wrong with that? Why don't they do that? In the Bernie days, they would have said, Max and Bernie would have said, oh, it would devalue Formula 1, we're not going to do that. But these days, Liberty are much more mature and have a much broader view, I think, of life. And they should look at that, because it's the only option now. We're losing too many good young drivers, either never making it to Formula 1 or going off into other categories and not wanting to come back to Formula 1. Carl Gevers, good afternoon, Peter and all fans. Good afternoon to you, Carl. Arsene Martins, again, with your experience, especially in this area with Williams, how does the title sponsorship deal work? Is it really essential for the teams? For example, Scuderia Ferrari, HP now. Yeah, I saw that. Made me smile, because when I was at Williams, I wasn't at Williams at the time, but I did a lot of work with Williams when they were sponsored by Compaq. And it was really good. It was in the Ralf Schumacher, Juan Pablo Montoya days, and we were winning races, and I was doing a lot of hosting with Andy Collis of HP, and it was a really good sponsorship program, really good. And HP did a really good job. Sorry, Compaq did a really good job with it. And then Compaq got bought by HP, and Carly Fiorina came in, and one of these classic things, and just broke the whole thing up. All the sponsorship ended, and it was a mess, a mess from our perspective. It all just ground to a halt, and it was all thrown down the toilet. And I just felt that's typical big business, actually supposedly making a lot of money on Wall Street, but actually making things a billion times worse for everybody. And now HP magically coming back in. I mean, they're doing football and everything else. Now they're sponsoring Ferrari. Yeah, the title sponsorship, in answer to your question, I said, title sponsorship is still something that is on the card, the menu card of all the Formula 1 teams. They try and sell it. And it's the big one. It's the one where you get the name of the team, and you would have the largest square footage or square centimeters on the car, and you'd have the mechanics overalls, the truck, and everything else. So that's the big one. And not many Formula 1 teams actually these days, in the true essence of the word, have a title sponsor. I know Stake Sauber have one, but I can't imagine the Stake sponsorship of Sauber is anything like as big as, say, the Vodafone sponsorship of McLaren was, even in real numbers. So I think the HP Ferrari thing is big for sure, because HP just seem to be spending money like water at the moment in everything. But how big? It's probably not a massive improvement over the big cigarette title sponsorship days of West and Marlboro. But Ferrari, yeah. They've still got Philip Morris money, haven't they, in the background somewhere? And now they've got HP as well. So they're certainly not short of money. What are they doing it all? Bearing in mind there's a budget cap on. Where's it all going? That's a good question, isn't it? I suppose Lewis, Charles, a lot of money there to be paid in retainers. Oh, no, we got a budget cap. Sorry. Drivers are outside the budget cap. The two drivers, I think, and we did some numbers, didn't we? The two drivers at Ferrari next year are getting paid more than the team is technically allowed to spend in the entire year to go racing. What would Enzo Ferrari think about that? Eugenio Castellotti and Luigi Musso are actually going to cost you more, Enzo, than the entire racing budget for the year. Out of my office. Go. You're a crazy man. No, never. Yeah. I wonder who in Enzo's era, even when Gilles joined, he rang up Jacobazzi, didn't he? He knew Jacobazzi he was local, and Wine said, I've got a great driver for you to sponsor and pay for. I'm not going to pay his retainer, you can. And that's why Gilles was a Jacobazzi driver. Carlos was mainly Marlboro, I think. Most of the drivers are all just Marlboro drivers. They found Brooklyn chewing gum for Jody. And actually, interestingly, Jody's selling all these cars, isn't he? But one of them, I think, it's already been bought, or he bought one from. There's a connection between the guy that started Brooklyn Chewing Gum, and I think it's the Porsche 91710 that he raced. I may be wrong there, but some connection there between that and the Brooklyn guy. Whatever happened to Brooklyn Chewing Gum anyway? I never see it on the stands these days. And whilst we're on that subject, okay, I know that the Marlboro logoed watches that they gave to us in 1972 at the French Grand Prix all packed up after about an hour of use, and they weren't very good. But they did get a bit better after a while, and I've still got a few things that I was very lucky to have been given as a journalist over the years. An elf fuel and oil leather bag still looks really good and still does its thing, for example. But I've been trying to download the Visa Cash app and try to get it to work. Forget it. I've never managed to get on with any of the Visa apps. Completely, they never accept the right password. There's always a drama with something. It's never right. And the Visa Cash app, as identified by the logo on the car in the color in which it appears, I can't even find it on my phone. I can't even see it. What's the point of having a sponsorship where nothing is real? I don't get it. I know somebody's going to say, oh no, I've got the Visa Cash app, works really well. I know somebody's going to do that. I'm just talking about me here, where I live in Spain. It ain't here. It isn't working. Reminds me of Eddie Jordan when the days when cash machines started to appear, when they were a new thing. Oh, cash machine, just press a button and get cash. That's it. Life is sorted. And he used to work behind the bank, didn't he, old Eddie? Yeah, couldn't think of anything better than that. Joe Spiker, F88, Roman numerals. G'day, Peter. Could you explain the difference between the way Max or Lewis back in the day overtake the field when they qualified low, whilst Checo or Bottas could not? What do you see? Well, I think give Lewis a chance. He does pretty well. He didn't do badly in terms of overtakes in China, did he? The big thing, if I had to say, I would say it was they never faff around. It's like Max, it's obviously accentuated by DRS. As soon as you're in the DRS zone, you're within a half second, you've got the green light, the DRS. Right, I'm going to overtake. And it's like, don't leave it a lap, don't leave it 2 laps, just go for it. You got the DRS. So that's changed everything, sadly, because before DRS, there was a moment when you knew it was the right moment to do the pass and the wrong moment to do the pass. When you were just a fraction, a little bit too far back, even if you left your braking really late, it's going to be a big ask to go down there. But DRS has kind of nullified all that. But in a nutshell, I would say they don't faff around and they just go for it straight away. And I think in both their cases, less so for today because of GPS and all the stuff for impeding, but in both, certainly in Lewis's heyday, let's talk Formula 2 even, he just had this incredible feel for what the guy in front was going to do and what holes he was going to leave and how difficult or not he was going to make it and where he was going to brake. And you could see Lewis could feel what the guy in front was going to do next, and he would just immediately counter it. Apart from Alexander Premat at Barcelona in that GP3 race when they both at ART and they had that collision, I think, didn't they? And maybe I asked Lewis once about that shunt he had with Nico at Barcelona on the first lap, and he said, "Oh yeah, I regret." I said, "Did you do anything wrong in your own mind?" He said, "Well, the next day I thought maybe I should have given him more room or something." I think it's slightly different when you're racing your teammate like that. That's not what you're talking about, is it? You're talking about slicing through the field. And I think that was it. They just had great feel for what the guy in front is going to do, and they don't faff around. They just get on with it and make the pass as soon as they're in the right catchment area. Sorry, I just clicked on a question which just after the thing had jumped, but we'll go to it anyways. Surf Souse. Lewis, not the driver he was, but still pretty good. Oh, well, that's good of you to say so. Thank you. I'm sure he'll be delighted to know that you think that. Shubdeep Singh. This is a super chat. Thank you very much. Hi Peter. If out of nowhere Max leaves for that Merc project as early as 25, who will then partner Checo, and if they will still win, and will they still win the World Championship? Uh, if Max leaves Red Bull, they'll take Sainz, I would imagine, wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they do that? Let me think. Who else would they take? Liam Lawson? I mean, no. I think they'd take Sainz. He's a winner and he's good. He's much better than he was when he was at Red Bull before. He's improved a lot. He's a good guy. Can they still win the World Championship? Well, in my view, if Max left Red Bull for Merck, he wouldn't have done so unless Adrian Newey was doing the same thing. So if Adrian Newey has left Red Bull with Max, then yeah, there's a big doubt then whether they would just breeze into winning the next World Championship. Not necessarily they would. You'd have to say then Mercedes probably will, because they'll have not only Max, but they'll have Adrian Newey there. That'd be the only condition on which he'd go there, I think. Another super chat. Andrea Crasinon. Thanks very much, Andre. Sorry, I said Andrea. I'd take Mick until Kimi develops. He'd work hard. Yeah, I wouldn't in any way. I think Mick would be the perfect driver, actually, to have there, because he's done so much work behind the scenes. He would know this is a real chance. He's pretty good, Mick. He's better than most people think. And he'd do a very good job for 1 year with if this Kimi arrives. Wouldn't it be funny if Mick turned out to be quicker than Kimi? Silence there. Yeah. Pregnant pause. Just looking at see if there's any other super chats I missed. There's a lot of questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your support. This is really good. So where are we going? I'm going right back to where we were now. Okay. Vinny the D, so he's just clarifying again with another super chat. By multiple engine formula, I meant like V6, V8, V10. You mean I'm still not quite clear. I think at a time when you could run different cylinders sizes, you mean, which is going back quite a long way now. But yeah, it was great, wasn't it? You had the V6 Renault turbo and you had the V8 Cosworth or whatever. You had the V10 Renault and then you had the turbos and no, you didn't have the V10 Renault against the turbos, but you had normally aspirated against turbos for a long time. And of course, back in the 60s, you had an H16 against a V8 against a V12. So you had lots of different, they were fun, weren't they? Multi-cylinder engines. Not going to see that happening again, I don't think, are you? Pranay Sharma. Hi, Peter. Are there any type of circuits that suit long corner drivers anymore? Yeah, Melbourne. Absolutely. I mean, short. Yeah, of course. And bear in mind, Ayrton Senna wasn't a short corner driver in the way Alain Prost was, and yet he was unbelievably quick. Yeah, I've possibly misled some people into thinking that the only way to drive really well is with short corners. That's not the case. All I'm saying is that if you have the touch and feel that enables you to shorten the corners, extend the straights into and out of the corners, and have that feel for the right rotation moment, millisecond, and do it correctly, that is preferable to braking in a straight line as late as you possibly can and then trying to get on the power as soon as you possibly can, given the G-load of the corner. And it's preferable because it leaves you more margin for error and you're more able to manipulate the car with all the variables that inevitably come into play. And that's possibly why Ayrton, when he did have accidents, had really violent accidents, because he just got something slightly wrong in the way he drives. I'm not talking about Imola now, because that was a different thing altogether. I'm talking about Cadwell Park, Formula 3, good example. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go in terms of his own sweet spot of driving. He was on the absolute limit, and when he went slightly over that limit, he just crashed straight into a marshal's post and demolished the car. Whereas an Alain Prost, even in Formula 3, when he was winning the European Championship, was turning in a little bit earlier, just getting the car nice and square. Everything was very supple. And that didn't make him quicker, but it gave him more ability to manage the car through all the variables. And that's what Max does. It's what Max does all the time. It's what Lewis does all the time. And it's what Charles wants to do and likes to do, but doesn't do all the time, because I think he's a bit lost in the head again. But that's, I'm sure he'll get that back. So, what we saw, and there are corners which, like turn 1 in China, where even Lando and Carlos Sainz could feel as if they're a short corner driver because they're getting in quite early. It just lends itself to getting into the corner early, that long right-hander. And so you could argue there that doesn't really suit a short corner driver because it neutralizes everything. So your question is, are there any types of circuits that suit long corner drivers anymore? It'll be circuits like, I know it's boring, but it'll be circuits like Singapore with long straights and 90-degree corners. Very difficult. I mean, all Max is going to be able to do there is just make sure he's braking with the car absolutely square to the road, and he's coming in to a rotation point that allows him to have a nice straight exit as soon as he can find it. Whereas Carlos will be a little bit more edgy, but he won't be making massive mistakes because it's a fairly basic thing, it's not that complicated. And Perez will be, with his slightly longer corners than Max, will be getting the feel for the rear a little bit earlier than Max, perhaps. Max will be straightening the car a bit, but Perez will be keeping the car a little bit more curved, but really good on his power application, and be at least as quick as Max as a result through on it from apex to exit. And Lewis will be slightly earlier corners than Lando and George, and giving himself a slightly bigger sweet spot in which to play. And at the moment, with a car that's got a difficult front end and the tyre temperatures are all over the place, it's kind of difficult for him to show that. But that's what he's doing, and he doesn't have huge violent offs. He just has the occasional lock up and things like that, and then he backs away because the front feels terrible. I was going to repeat my point. You've got to have a decent front end to be able to do all of the things that I've just been talking about. So Singapore, what can you, if you're a good short corner driver at Monza, say, I think it'll show up at turn 1. What you do in the middle of turn 1, that sort of change of direction for 2, exit of 2. Barcelona, that's where, again, turn 1, 2 into 3. That's where a good short corner driver will be good. But somewhere like turn 9 at Barcelona, which is a quick corner leaning onto the back straight, a bit of crosswind, there won't be much between Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc through there. What Carlos does there will be fine. And he's good. I mean, because he's pretty reflexy, the crosswinds won't worry him that much going through past the gap there. Silverstone, short corner driver at Silverstone, and be pretty good through that sort of funny, messy bit after the start down to that tight left hairpin. You can possibly gain a bit there, but there's nowhere to reward what you're doing. There's no long straight. So that last left-hander before the back straight, the first long straight, the track's so wide there that it doesn't really matter what you do there. And then the next bit, I think, that right-hander leading onto the old pit straight, possibly a short corner driver would do well there. But Sebastian Vettel was always really good there. It was a really good V corner, that one, more than anything else. Copse, maybe a little bit. If you got Max Verstappen leading the race and you want to go inside him and you're a shorter corner driver than Max, you can take him off. Oh, shouldn't have said that. What was Max doing so far out in the middle of the road if he's a short corner driver? No, I think Copse you could gain a little bit, I think Beckett's, maybe. But it's difficult to see Carlos or Senna being slow through Beckett's. And so... No, there are plenty of circuits still suit drivers as good as Ayrton Senna was. And he was the ultimate long corner driver, if you like. Sebastian Bach asks, is Danny Rick done? Would be good to see him make Monaco. Make Monaco and before he's kicked out, you mean? Or do something good at Monaco. Well, he did pretty well in China, didn't he? I don't know whether that was... because Yuki Tsunoda just had a horrendous weekend from start to finish and was moaning and complaining about the car being undrivable. Well, it wasn't undrivable, actually. He said the lap felt very quick. He couldn't believe he was so slow, which is an indication that it's just lacking downforce for some reason. And these days, it could be something to do with a damaged floor or maybe the chassis or something like that. So it could be that. So against all that, Daniel did a pretty good job getting into Q2 and was looking pretty good in the race, wasn't he? He drove quite well and might have scored a point, might have finished 10th had he not been rudely rammed by Lance Stroll, who petulantly blamed that idiot Ricciardo for braking so hard. And Ricciardo, all he was doing was braking at the rate the people were in front, unlike Lance Stroll, who immediately had to blame everybody else, as he did in Hungary when he did the same thing a couple of years ago in the first corner. I mean, this kid, this is the problem. This is a difference between Alex Albon and Oscar Piastri and Lance Stroll. Albon and Piastri look around at what other drivers are doing, try to learn from them, and make intelligent comments periodically. Lance Stroll thinks the whole world revolves around him for some reason. Can't imagine why. And as Daniel said, it didn't even look as if he was watching the car in front anyway. George Russell in Melbourne, make note. Yeah, he wasn't looking at Fernando either, was he? When he ran, he didn't actually hit Fernando, but he went off because he was frigging around with these toggle switches on his steering wheel. I've done a video about that. Going Postal says, seems like Carlos is thriving under pressure. Charles, not so much. Well, the interesting thing is that Charles isn't under pressure. So maybe that's what Charles needs. They've taken the pressure off Charles. They've said, oh, no, you're the man. We're going to triple your salary and you're on a contract for the next 25 years. You're going to have Lewis in the other car. Oh, Lewis, you should be able to beat him. You're the man, Charles. No pressure at all. What's going on? Please advise. Charles Leclerc. I don't know. He's got good people there. He did all right. I mean, we shouldn't. I'm only joking, really. I think he's very good, Charles Leclerc. I'm never ever going to underestimate Charles Leclerc. He's extremely talented. What about Carlos Sainz though? How well he's doing under pressure. And that lap after he'd shunted the car and he'd driven back in and drove out of the garage, that was pressure. That was real pressure. To have to, no, car's okay, no problem, no, ride height's good, everything, go. And he's got him out and they told him the car's good, so he's got to do the lap time. And he did. Good on him. Edwin Schroten, what do you think of the Grand Prix of Thailand? Yeah. What that immediately makes me think, I'm very sad that Rainer Wissel has passed away because he used to live in Thailand and I was a big fan of Rainer. Very good Formula 1 driver, very good Formula 3 driver. Good man all round, good guy. And he would have loved having a Grand Prix in Thailand. Be good for Rory Byrne, wouldn't it? That finally be able to go to a race again without having to get on a plane and all that drama with passports. Yeah, he lives in Thailand. I don't know, I can't say much more. I'll have to ring my mate Matt Marsh and see what he says about that. He's Mr. Eastern part of the planet. So I don't think anything happens in that part of the world without Matt's permission these days. So we'll find out what's going on. John Brown, if you thought Abu Dhabi 21 was okay, don't talk about rules, consistency, etc. Who are you talking about? I didn't think Abu Dhabi 21 was okay. And it's probably not addressed to me, I hope not. I thought Abu Dhabi 21 was a complete and utter shower. Foon, hi Peter. Who of the younger drivers under 30 would you say would do best in earlier generation cars, say 2004? And similarly, what era of cars would younger drivers get on with the quickest? When you said earlier generation cars, I thought you were going to say 1957, 59, if you want to have rear engines. And I was already thinking, oh, wow, Liam Lawson in a Cooper Climax. No, 2004, what was that? That was the whole Michael dominating Formula One with Bridgestones in the Ferrari era, wasn't it? I don't think those cars were... I think they're obviously earlier generation and a different set of rules, but they were pretty technical and, steering wheel computers and paddle shiftish, weren't they? Well, they were. I mean, Michael was the first really to bring left foot braking and mid-corner gear changing to the level in which we see it today. And most guys adapted to that pretty well. I mean, even Eddie Irvine could drive those cars quite well, couldn't he, in 1999? But if we went to a different era when the cars slid more and you could drift them and you could really slide them in the way that Chris Amon could slide a 1968 V12 Ferrari around Alton Park, which drivers would be good at that today? I think that's quite a good question, if I may ask it. It probably is annoying for you that I'm going down that path, but the aforementioned Liam Lawson for sure. I mean, there's no way Max wouldn't be good in a 1968 Ferrari around Alton Park. If it was 1968, he'd be there with Chris, drifting the thing through Old Hall, as would Lewis, as would Charles. Carlos Sainz would be spectacular. Great. You can get away actually more with that sort of car control-y, reflexy Alex Albon driving with those sorts of cars. You had a bigger margin. The cars just didn't just go like that. You could drift them more and the tyres lasted forever. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would still be, I mean, it says a lot about our sport, actually, that the great drivers of today would still be the great drivers if we were able to transplant them back to 68 or 2004. It's still bringing the great drivers to the surface. Let's think, I mean, Daniel Ricciardo is a good example. He'd probably really thrive in those cars, front engine or rear. If he could drift them, slide them, he'd be quick, I think. Who would be good? George Russell would be good too, probably. Yeah, I can see George winning Crystal Palace Formula 2 and then getting a Cooper drive and doing pretty well at Clermont-Ferrand in a Cooper Climax as a result. Sort of Vic Elford style. Not that Vic won Crystal Palace, but Vic did a lot of other stuff. Anyway, moving on. Nick Bosman, Peter, your content really adds to my Formula One experience. Thanks very much, Nick. And I wish to express my gratitude. Your vast knowledge and enthusiasm is marvellous. Thank you very much, Nick. Kind of you to write. Very kind. Carl agrees 100%. I am Tim. EYEAMTIM. Hello, Peter. Thank you for doing these sessions. You're always interesting and your stories are great for us fans. Thank you very much. Foon says, hi, Peter. With BMW back in World Endurance Championship, how likely are we likely to see them back in Formula One? I'd much rather see Williams BMW again than Williams being taken over by a no heritage company only interested in money. Well, I agree with the last statement, definitely. And I do think that the BMW-Williams alliance was the biggest missed opportunity, possibly in the history of Formula One. I mean, why that didn't end in a full consummation, well, I know why. It's because Frank and Patrick still had this thing about wanting to keep the team independent and didn't want to be taken over. So, great shame. I think at the time I felt a great shame. I'm not saying that retrospectively. But it was just, that was typical of Frank, really, because he never, ever wanted to relinquish his control. He just loved the idea of owning this private company, Williams Grand Prix Engineering, and doing what he wanted with it, really, hiring whatever drivers he wanted and running whatever engines he wanted and going racing the way he wanted to go racing. But when BMW did want to buy Williams, Williams rejected the offer, and I think it's a great shame because it would have been very good. And as a result, they pulled out. Well, they did other stuff, but it was not very good. Will we see them back again? You know, it's difficult to predict, isn't it? All these car companies, the changeover of management is like every 3 years or something, isn't it? So whoever's at BMW now and wanting to do World Endurance may not be the person in charge when there's an opportunity maybe in a few years to do Formula One. Be somebody else who may hate Formula One, hate motorsport in general and not do it. It's all to do with, look at HP, the story I was just telling you. There's Carly Fiorina destroying the whole Formula One sponsorship thing that began with Compaq and then became HP, just completely destroyed it, pulled all the sponsorship out, and now HP are back in Formula One again. What's it all about? What does it mean? Where are we going? What are we going to do when we get there? Ian GBM TV Gibson. That's a good one. Who do you believe will lose their seat first, Logan, Daniel, or Checo? We're going to the bookmakers now. Are we on a bet? Will they take a bet on that? I wonder. Who's going to lose their seat first? What do you mean by losing a seat? Do you mean losing a seat and then never driving in Formula One again for the rest of the year, or do you mean losing it and going to another team, or what? I mean, that obviously the lose has to be qualified. Logan, I think, will see out the year, won't he? They must feel a bit guilty about what they did to him in Melbourne, at least. Even if he's a week or two late on payments, they might just say, oh, well, it's no problem, Logan, carry on. He's doing a pretty good job, I think. I don't really ever spend much time talking about him because he just goes, he does what he does. But he's, You know, it's not easy, is it? Young American, number 2 Williams. It's quite tough, but equally he's doing a better job than Nicholas Latifi, I think. Daniel or Checo? Of those two, I would say Daniel's more likely to lose his drive sooner than Checo. The Checo thing's a bit funny though, isn't it? It's a bit like the sort of barometer needle, you know, suddenly looking quite good, and then China happens and it drops down again, and then Miami he might have a good race and everybody gets relaxed, and then he has a bad race somewhere else. You can't really judge him on 1 or 2 races because he's there for the season in theory, and he's there to help Max win the championship and to help Red Bull win the Constructors' Championship, which he's doing and has done pretty well over the years. So, next question, Philip Rust. Vermeil or Fangio? Jean-Pierre Vermeil. Yeah, he was good, wasn't he? I think Jean-Pierre Vermeil was killed in Buenos Aires, wasn't he? Showing my ignorance here. I'm just trying to get, you know, just seeing if there was that synergy. We mentioned Vermeil and Fangio. That there is, let me just look this up. Sorry, I've got to use the dreaded Wikipedia to look this up. Vermeil, I think he did it. I may be confusing with somebody else. Let's have a look. And Vermeil, here we go. Jean-Pierre Vermeil, yeah, died in Buenos Aires, 1949. So there's your link with Fangio. On the street course, actually, not the Parque Almirante Brown. Very sad. He was very quick. He was very quick post-war. And he won at Bois de Boulogne, one of the first races, actually, after the war. Got motor racing back again. You know, France was at the front of the queue to go racing again, and Vermeil was right there. But I mean, you'd have to say Fangio, wouldn't you, if it was those two? I mean, I just can't see one area where Vermeil, he was probably as quick in the same car or nearly as quick over one lap. But even one lap, I think Fangio would have had him. So, yeah, Fangio was everything. And for modern viewers, everything you see in Max is Juan Manuel Fangio, absolutely, if not more. Because Fangio also did a lot of other racing. He wasn't brilliant in sports cars, but he was good. He was very good in sports cars. Rallying, he was good. And Formula One, he was just peerless, really. Richard Spooner. Would it not be better to do ground effect as we had in the late 70s with better skirt system? Also spec active suspension. Well, I went through all of this when we went into the new regulations. First of all, talking to various people about how much more effective, how much easier it would be to control the porpoising and the bouncing if we had skirts. And everybody poo-pooed it and said, no, it would destroy the racetracks. And that's why we banned skirts, because it would destroy the tarmac. So there you go. There's your answer. And the second one, active suspension. Again, you know, these days, active suspension would not be a costly or expensive exercise. Everything would be relatively simple, straightforward. Proprietary parts could be bought. And as you say, you can have a spec active suspension, and that would definitely help. But because Bernie rushed through the paddock at Hockenheim in 1993 with a list of things that he thought should be banned from Formula One forever, and because they included active ride, that's why we don't have active ride. It was called the Hockenheim Agreement. And all the people signed it, all the team owners signed it, which was, in my view, a huge mistake. But anyway, they all did. And that's that. And we banned skirts because of two reasons. One, it did make the ground effect incredibly effective. Excuse the double word there. But and the worry was it would make the cars so quick around corners that the drivers would need G-suits and the circuits would all have to be changed, and it would just kill Formula One basically. So that's one of the reasons they banned skirts. The other was the damage they were doing to the racetracks. So I don't think we're ever going to go back there, sadly. Nonyo B. Why is there no talk of Sainz to Williams? Seems an ideal fit. Williams needs a top-tier driver to help them rebuild, and Sainz is as well-rounded a driver as any on the grid. Yeah, I can see that works from Williams' point of view. I can't see it works from Carlos Sainz's point of view. Why would he want to go to Williams? I just can't see the synergy there at all. Unless Patrick Head was coming out of retirement and deciding to go back because of the 26 regs, and he demanded that Carlos Sainz was his driver, or Adrian Newey was going there and demanded Carlos Sainz. Yeah, I can see that. But as they are at the moment, why would Carlos go to Williams? He might as well go to Sauber and go on to Audi, wouldn't he? Just as good a bet. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Nonya, but I just don't see what's in it for Carlos Sainz. Of course, there's a lot in it there for Williams. Yeah, if they could get him, they'd take him. But I just don't believe that they would. I am TM says Carlos going to Audi unless Red Bull increase their offer. Yeah, well, I mean, it is the only option for him, really. If Red Bull keep Sergio Perez, which I think they're likely to do, as I've always said, in that there's no reason really to replace him with Sainz. That's all. That's the first thing. And if Mercedes are just, totally into running Antonelli now, then the only option for Carlos, unless he goes to Merck for 1 year, which he might, and then that could be the right solution for him. As I said before, he goes to Mercedes for 1 year, onto Audi in 26, but it's a difficult 25 because there won't be an open relationship between Mercedes and Carlos Sainz, and it'll be a difficult year for him as a driver to go in 1 year and blow George Russell away when George knows the team so well, and he's quick anyway. Yeah, we're talking about Oscar again. I think this is the same question that's come up about why Oscar's struggling. I don't really know why he's been struggling. Difficult. Mercedes on the downward spiral, IMTM says. Yeah, well, absolutely. Just repeat the point. Not that I would expect, I suppose, Toto Wolff to take any notice of anything I've ever said, but I have actually tried to contact him on behalf of an engineer who is available, who in my opinion, obviously not Toto's opinion, is very, very good, particularly when it comes to ground effect, to say that this engineer would like to talk to Mercedes and to see if he could perhaps do some consultancy. And I've just had no reply at all. So it's a bit like these things, we attempted to contact them, but they refused to get back to us. It wouldn't take any of our calls. It's a bit like that. Buried in the sand? I don't know. I can't, from my evidence, I can't say they got their heads buried in the sand, but it doesn't appear as if they want to look around and see if people are trying to give constructive suggestions, that they're actually open to those. Ben4810. I have a question, Peter. In the global travelling circus of Formula One, any tales of items of race team equipment that got left behind in the pit garage or paddock? It's a good question, Ben. The answer is not really, because the teams go into when they are packing up, they go into pack up mode very efficiently, and they always did, even in my day back in the 90s, or indeed before that. And it's not that difficult to make sure there's nothing left in the garage, and there's nothing left between the garage and the truck or the motorhome, and to get out there. I remember in one Japanese Grand Prix, before they modernized the back of the pits, there were sort of quite old offices where the teams all met and debriefed and everything, and it was early 2000s, and late on the Sunday night, long after the Ferrari team had gone home, I did go back into the Ferrari office, which the door was just open, swinging in the breeze, to see what might be in the garbage bin there, if there are any interesting bits of graffiti from Ross Brawn or Michael or whatever. And I did actually find a couple of bits of paper which had tyre, there were the Bridgestone tyre temperature things, which was quite good, which of course I kept. But that's about the only time I can think of that I've ever come across something like that. Maybe I haven't done enough snooping. I did get the towel that Kimi had around his neck and mopped his face with after he won the championship in Brazil in 2007, and he dropped it or something, and I picked it up and he said, you take. So I took the towel. I've got that towel still. Haven't washed it. What's that mouldy thing over there in the corner? Oh, that's what that is. But yeah, that doesn't really fall under that heading. No, I can't really think of anything like that. It's a good question though. I'm sure somebody else has probably got some good stuff they can come up with. Station 2 pod host. Good morning from Canada. Peter, what are your thoughts on Jacques Villeneuve's career and where he stacks up all time? Are there any modern drivers that you feel are similar to his style? Yeah, good question. I got very fond of Jacques because he was so good in Formula Atlantic, and then he was so good in IndyCar, and he won that Indy 500, and then he came over and he put the Williams on the pole in his first race, and he won his championship, and then he got a bit bedazzled by money and everything else and went off the rails a bit. But he's a good bloke now, and he's quite normal now. He's not, pretentious ex-Formula One champion. He's a normal bloke to talk to. So I got a lot of time for him, and obviously I knew his dad very well and his mum. I still know his mum very well, and fond of her anyway. I hadn't seen her for a while. And so as a driver, yeah, I mean, he was very, very, I would say very Lando Norris, very soft touch, very, very supple in everything he did. Quite long corners, definitely didn't try to pursue short corners in the same way that Lando doesn't try to pursue them. His main issue, I always felt, was how stiff his throttle springs were. It was like an on-off switch for Jacques, which was in the way that Senna's throttle blipping always made you think, why is he doing that? Turbo era, no turbo era, he always did it. And even Ayrton didn't really know why he did it, apart from that he was just trying to feel the moment to get the power on in its entirety. And with Jacques, it was the opposite. It was this weird on-off throttle switch thing, which just like, and it's just like, he was definitely not a ragged, oversteery, reflexy driver. He was definitely manipulative and very nice to watch in the car. But he did have this weird thing with the throttle, what can I say? The other thing about Jacques was that he wore very baggy overalls, and which in itself is no issue. I mean, I can imagine why you'd want to wear baggy overalls. They don't want anything tight around you anyway, do you? But of course, in a seat, you do have to be very tight, and you're strapped in very tight. And it used to drive the mechanics mad, the number of seat fittings that he'd go through, because every time he did a seat fitting, there would be a different crease that they'd crimped with the seat belts on the overalls, and he'd feel slightly different and uncomfortable. So every race he'd say, no, terrible seat, I need a new seat. So it drove him all mad. The answer was, of course, to get much tighter David Coulthard spec race suits, but Jacques never went for that. He loved the old baggy ones. But I like the way he did his own rendition of his dad's helmet. I thought that was a very nice touch. And he was difficult for a few years in the whole Craig Pollock era when he went off the rails. The rails created by, went off the branch line with Craig Pollock. But when he was normal and he was a good guy, he was great. He was good in Japanese F3 too. Francesco Mello. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for your live streams. I don't miss one. And also your weekly live chat with Cameron. Are they live with Cameron? Oof, I hope not. I'm sure they are. Anyway, yeah, Cameron's a good bloke. For those that don't know about Cameron, you should go to his YouTube channel, have a look. And he's all over social media as well. Good bloke, just loves motor racing. It's fun talking to Cameron, because every time Lewis has a good race, he's way up in the clouds. And every time Lewis has a bad race, it's, what are we going to do, Peter? And I love that, brilliant. Belize Stephanie says, YouTube, number one. I think it's a number one on there. Thank you very much. And a nice trophy, a nice medal, something else. Yeah, what do we think about those medals in the sprint race, whatever they were, those things they're holding up? I mean, come on. Can't they do a better job than that? They can, because they used to have garlands. What's wrong? That was a great thing. That was the one thing I liked about the whole sprint concept, was that it brought the garland back into Formula One. And now they've killed that. Why? What is the point of those stupid things they're holding up? Lewis, I remember walking around the trophy room at Merck with Lewis, and he was bemoaning how rubbishy most of the trophies were, in a nice way, but, saying, look how lovely the original British Grand Prix trophy was, for example. And now you don't even get a trophy. What's that all about? Ridiculous. Alfred Clark, hello. With all the talk about the down electrification, not just in Formula One, but in the world, and as Formula One should be on the cutting edge, shouldn't they consider green H2, FCEV, etc. instead? Yeah, maybe. But as we've been saying, the fans are what drive Formula One in the end, the fans that watch Formula One on TV. And do they really care about all that? This is a rhetorical question. I'm not in any way suggesting they do or they don't. And that's the whole point about these discussions on the future of Formula One and where we're going. How much of it is about technology and going green and all that and cutting edge of green technology? How much of it is about just putting on a great show that the fans will pay a reasonable amount of money to watch? That's the big thing. You can talk about that forever, really. It's a bit like, who was better, Max Verstappen or Sterling Moss? You can talk about it forever. Speaking of which, I'm looking forward. Looking forward is the wrong word, but I am looking forward to going to the memorial service at Westminster Abbey in London for Sterling in early May, and it's good. I mean, I like memorial services in a way because you've got over the sadness of the loss to some extent, and you can actually reflect more on the gift of his life and everything that Sterling achieved. And so it'll be a very nice day, I think. Shyam Kuba, I want to hear your thoughts on the track layout of the now defunct Indian Grand Prix. Do you think it was a good racetrack? Yeah, I thought it was all right. I think it's good. It's a Tilke circuit. The layout was pretty good. I enjoyed the race. I went there and the people embraced it. I thought it was going to be on the calendar for years. I couldn't believe it. A bit like Dallas. I couldn't believe it when it was off. I know they then had problems, I think, with subsidence, didn't they, or something like that. But the actual layout was okay. Some quite interesting corners. Even the chicanes weren't that slow and annoying. They were quite good. So I didn't have a problem with that. I just had a problem with the way Formula One didn't really follow up the race with promotion or get into the race early or do anything over the winter to promote its brand to the Indian fans in the winter, which they should have done. And they should have made sure that we had 2 or 3 good young Indian drivers coming up through the system for the Indian fans to get excited about. We've seen how that worked in China with Zhou Guanyu, and it would have been double of that if Formula One had got behind Yifei as well. And it would have worked if, Jehan Darubala was in Formula One now. India would be much more likely to have a race. So it's so sad that Formula One doesn't spend more money and time on making sure we have proper systems for these young drivers to get into Formula One from these countries that are so important to the industry. Scoochie4, hi Peter, this is a great one. I'm very honoured. I'm more than honoured. I'm completely aghast at this. I just ran the London Marathon listening to your streams the entire time. Well, congratulations on doing the London Marathon. What a great thing. A friend of mine here in Spain, English guy, did the marathon as well. Beat about 200 people in his category, which he's delighted with. He's actually Jack's swing coach, so a really good bloke, Paul Carpenter. But to do the London Marathon, thank you very much. I'm so sorry you had to listen to me throughout. I mean, I can't imagine that was in any way motivation. But anyway, speaking of nice things, 52,750 pounds is what Alistair Caldwell, who was James Hunt's chief mechanic in '76 when they won the World Championship, amongst many other things in motor racing. He's one of Bruce McLaren's first employees. Very, very good chief mechanic stroke team manager he became at Brabham. Left Formula One a while ago now, and it's so great. It's a lovely success story because so often mechanics don't get a great break. Dickie Stamford, recently I saw him, and he's now retired, but he's doing very well. He's got lots of good plans as well, so congratulations to him. But going back to Alistair Caldwell, he started this business of classic Formula One methodology. He's New Zealand. I went into the storage business, and because it meant I owned the land and I didn't have to do much inside the building. It was the logical thing to do. No, I'm speaking South African there, aren't I? Sorry, Alistair. Anyway, I won't do the accent anymore. So anyway, the storage business, perfect. You got the land, don't have to do much inside, just a few partitions, a few padlocks. There you go, Bob's your uncle. Absolutely massive success story. Made an absolute fortune. Big Yellow. No, not Big Yellow. What's it called? Space Saver. There you go. Sorry, Space Saver. And still going today. And as a result, he bought he lived the dream. He bought, I don't know, every classic car in the world that he liked. He bought, whether it be a Bentley or this or that, or some old Citroen or a Matra, whatever. He'd buy it, restore it, build it, and then he'd do round the world classic rallies. What a life. And he's still going strong. But anyway, I mentioned that sum of money, £52,750, because he sold off a few of his cars at Goodwood recently in an auction. And all the money they raised, which was that, he paid into his two favourite charities. Isn't that a nice thing to do, back end of your career in motorsport, in automotive classic restoration, to do that? And congratulations to Alistair for that. What a great thing. Sujith says, I missed the 2.4 litre V8s, Peter. Yeah, well, the engines were thermally efficient like no other. Formula One can do well with a more modern version of that formula. Come back to hybrids when batteries are smaller, I say. Yeah, well, you're speaking to a guy that drove the V10 Toyota around Ricard. Don't tell me about how nice those engines are. Beautiful to drive as well. I agree with you. Anyway, it'd be interesting to see what Formula One does with battery technology and whether Formula One overtakes all the current automotive technology because they've got different requirements, and how quickly they can accelerate the move towards smaller, lighter batteries. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to all those batteries when they've gone through their, use by day, haven't they? That's a big question, isn't it? Where do they all go? You're going to lose this, and then it's going to come back again. Arsene Martins. I had a wonderful Saturday at Historic Grand Prix de France where I saw Alan Jones's FW07C. Which one? I mean, the one that won Vegas is owned by Johnny Williams. I don't think it was in France. Maybe it was. I doubt it. A Ferrari T4, BT49, and lots of Formula 3 marchers. These cars look so small. Yeah, it's a shame they do look small, isn't it? Because they weren't small at the time. They were quite big and ferocious, all of them. So, yeah, it's a shame. Sorry, you can't actually see that one. I don't know where it's gone now anyway. But that was a good question, a good comment. And they do look small now, but partly because of the way the drivers are now. That most of the drivers are quite big because they're all middle-aged, and that's where because they've got the money, they've earned the money, and then they spend it on these cars. So they're all quite big anyway, and then they have quite baggy overalls, and then they've got much bigger helmets because the helmets required today, they're much thicker and more padding and everything else. And then they have the hands collar, and then they want to have the big roll bar. And so all of a sudden the driver's completely out of proportion with the car. Because in those days, in every era, the cars are built in proportion, actually as it happens, or the driver's helmets are in proportion to the cars. And so they do look, that makes the cars look very small and spindly. I don't really enjoy seeing them like that. I'd much rather see them in Bernie Ecclestone's lockup at Biggin Hill, sitting there as they were when they crossed the line after their last race, on the tyres they were at that point, with the roll bar they had at that point, with the stickers on the car as they were at that point. And I don't like seeing Goodwood stickers or 2024 Classic stickers on them. I like to see them exactly as they were. Maybe start them up, hear what they sound like, maybe just run them up and down a little bit of straight, but don't do anything that requires having to put on big roll bars and stuff. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, but the whole fun is driving these things. Well, if you want to race, go and race Renault 5s, De Chevaux. Don't hurt yourself in these, because you can hurt yourself. John Dawson Damer, good example. So I'd rather see them parading than racing. And I'd like to see them parading exactly as they were in their time. Exactly right. Steering wheel, stickers, everything. Every detail is critical. And I remember talking to John Dawson Damer the day before he lost his life at Goodwood in that hill climb. And he was in the ex-Jochenrindt Lotus 63 four-wheel drive Formula One car, the 69 car, which Jochen hated because it was undrivable. And John had got this car, and he'd done quite a lot of classic car racing. He was pretty quick, but he wasn't a racing driver in his young days. He was a racing driver now. And I remember talking to him in the paddock at Goodwood. It was only the hill climb, and he was saying, oh yeah, but I think I can find a few tenths tomorrow. I'm going to change this, change that. And I remember thinking, and I'm not kidding, I remember thinking, wow, he's taking this a bit seriously. He's talking like a Formula 3 driver, after qualifying, going into the race tomorrow. He's not talking like a guy who's just enjoying driving an ex-Jochen Lotus slowly up the hill for the pleasure of being there. And sure enough, he was really quick. It was semi-wet or wet or something, and he went off. And sadly, a marshal, I think, was injured, badly injured, may have been fatally, I don't know, I can't remember. But I just think the whole thing's a bit too serious. And a lot of people will disagree with me now, and I'm not trying to be contentious, I'm just expressing my own opinion. And I know that there's nothing nicer probably than going to the Monaco Classic Grand Prix and the whole Zach Brown, Adrian Newey thing and getting in there, and they'll be racing hard, I know. But in some ways I wish they wouldn't. I don't want them to get hurt. I don't want the cars to be damaged. I mean, Charles Leclerc had that thing with the gearbox, didn't he, in the Ferrari, which was wrong. So, yeah, anyway. SatNav, good name, says Newey can visualize airflow in his mind's eye. Well, probably he can. I'm not saying that other aerodynamicists can't either. But Adrian has got, I don't think we should all sit here thinking Adrian is just this total magician. Adrian, as I say, is a very practical, logical person. The difference between Adrian, in my opinion, than everybody else is that he's a complete racer, in that he can run a car in the pit lane, he can actually drive the car quite well, and on top of that, he understands aerodynamics, and he understands design layout of cars, and he understands thermal efficiency of engines and how to design an engine. So he can do everything, a bit like Colin Chapman in a way, except that in Colin Chapman's day, the rule book was relatively open, and he could keep going down all these avenues of, ground effect or side radiators or wedge nose or whatever it was. Whereas Adrian's whole life is spent with this restrictive rule book, which gets bigger every year, and having to go down very precise aerodynamic details. It's more by necessity than love, I think. That's the Adrian I know. I think he just loves the whole practicality of it as much as he loves the drawing board and the wind tunnel and CFD. So he's just a really, really good racer, Adrian Newey. That's what he is. But yeah, for sure he can visualize airflow, for sure. But then I suspect Jason Somerville can as well. That's my point. Central point 99. Max has no competition in the second Red Bull. That's why Max era seems so boring. Well, speak for yourself. I don't think it's boring. I don't think, Formula One's boring right now. You're probably replying to somebody else, but anyway, I don't think it's boring, and I quite enjoy watching Red Bull do things as well as they do. I learn from it every time I watch a race. Actually, how well they go racing. There's always things to learn and watch. Chad Pearson. Don't you think the Red Bull is only so good because of Max? It looks ordinary with Perez, who is a good driver. Yeah, obviously. But then I've never said Perez was as good as Max Verstappen. So it was clear that Max wants a driver in the other car, and the team want another driver in the other car who isn't going to be cramping Max's style, so that Max can focus on getting the best from himself and the best from the team, which is what's going on. But if Red Bull didn't have Max and they still had Adrian Newey, they wouldn't be thinking of Perez as their number one driver. I can tell you that right now. They'd get somebody else quick, really quick. So let's move on. Suddenly being this chat thing starting to irritate me again and get a bit. So I'm just reading through some now because I haven't got that much more time. Another 8 minutes, I think. Let's have a look. Where are we? There's lots of chat between Max and Lewis and all the rest of it, and everybody will have their own thing. I mean, the current crowd will look at the statistics, but the statistics aren't the only thing you look at in racing. As I well learnt walking to school in Australia one year, I had to go through the Domain, a grassy area near Hyde Park in Sydney, to get from one bus to another, and there was oddly, I think it was Friday morning, he had a sort of speaker's corner thing there where people would stand up on a soapbox and ramble on about something. And as I walked past, I heard this guy who was on the soapbox, and he was saying, "Statistics, I don't care about statistics." I remember him saying, I thought, yeah, good man. So anyway, lots of driver chat. I'm going to move on to something else. MGUH. It's boring, isn't it? MGUH. I'm not saying any of the people or questions are boring, but I'm just the subject of that. This whole. So where are we? With all the Max and Lewis. Okay, I've got Moni here. See what we can say. Peter, how would you quantify how much is the car and how much is Max? We don't see Perez pulling results anywhere close to Max. Saying that Lewis had more opposition could be rather than his teammates being that much better. My point is, and I want to stress this, not that Lewis is worse than Max. My point is that we have no good reference. Well, I think you're right. You can't really compare those two situations. As I said, Lewis had Valtteri, and I think Valtteri on occasions is probably quicker than Perez was on occasions. Perez is, and then he had Nico, so and Max has got a much better setup for being Max Verstappen because he's got Perez there, and he's got in a great era of aerodynamic precision and intricate detail, he's got the best guy in the world to deal with that, and that's what he's getting the maximum from. So it's nothing more than that, really. It's everything. That is a massive thing, but it's equally nothing more than that. That is what it is, and so therefore, it's not. There's no magic to it. It's just that he's got a very, very good car, very, very good team, perfect teammate, and he's doing a perfect job in the car. It's not that complicated, really. So there we are. That's. I think people want to say, but the impression I get is some people want to say, oh, Lewis had a much better car and he's not therefore as good as Max, or Max has a much better car so he's not as good as Lewis. I mean, different eras, completely different eras. Max is driving in an aerodynamic era with the best aerodynamicist behind him. When Lewis was racing, it was more about, Lewis was winning. There was more difference between the power units, probably. Mercedes had the best engine for sure, but it wasn't that big a difference. And you could be an average engineer and still do a pretty good job. You didn't have to be as good as Adrian Newey is at aerodynamics to do as good a job as James Allison did on the Mercedes engineering. That's my opinion. There were plenty of people who did quite a good job, not necessarily every race, but over a season did a pretty good job. So there we go. Logan, we don't talk about Logan. Here's Premislaw Blazic. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing your name very well, but thank you. For sure, Alonso can beat Max in the same car. You said it, not I. That'll definitely generate some chat on the thing, but my job is just to say, yeah, well, there you go. That's an interesting comment. Very different drivers, and I'm not sure I agree with you, actually. But anyway, Alonso's unique in many ways, and it's great to have him around. So where are we going in front? Where are we going? Ray Maponga says, if you were to spend 7 million in an era where regulations change the following season, would you not spend it developing a new car for the new regs? That's why Red Bull has such a massive advantage. Lewis arguably has better peak performance, Max has better average performance, and never has a weekend off. Yeah, maybe. I don't think you can compare them, because if Max isn't getting better with every race, because everything is in perfect harmony, then there's something wrong with him. And I'm sure he is getting better with every race. And there's very few racing drivers in the history of the sport that have found themselves or been able to find themselves in the position in which Max is. I'm talking about great racing drivers, from Fangio to Ascari to Moss to Clark to Senna, wherever. There are very few examples. I can't think of any, actually, where a driver of that quality was in a team that good, with that much harmony in terms of the technology, the organisation, the budget and everything else, for so long. I can't think of one. Most of the eras, those sublime eras, all ended within 1 or 2 years. Max's eras of domination is just, at least 4 years now. And there's no reason to think it's going to stop. At least it's going to go through to 26. And if that's the case, he's going to be the first great driver to have taken his performance level to the height that he's probably going to be able to reach, because he's getting better with every race. Why wouldn't he? Everything is just there to enable that to happen, and he's bright enough for that to happen, and he's uncluttered enough in his racing brain to let that happen as well. So yeah, it's a brilliant thing to watch. That's why I say it's not boring to watch it, because it's a unique situation. Satnav says, arguably the older driver is better as new cars have more assists. Yeah, maybe. Well, Max's era. Some things are much easier, gear changing. Some things are more difficult, operating the steering wheel, knowing. By the way, there was one message from Daniel Ricciardo when they were talking about what they wanted to do to the back of the car. And they were talking about flap adjustments. It must have been, I can't remember, I think it must have been in the qualifying for the sprint or something. Or maybe in the sprint, I don't know, whatever it was. And they couldn't make that many adjustments to the car. And Daniel said, I'd rather do something with the diff for the EB, or words to that effect. And I was thinking, what is that EB? And some of you out there may well know, but I thought about it, and I think it's Formula One vernacular for exit balance, the balance of the car on exit and playing with the diff. He'd rather do that than play around with the front flap. Apropos nothing at all, but it's always quite interesting trying to sort of decipher all the hieroglyphics of Formula One and what they're really saying. Why doesn't he just say, no, use the diff, I'm going to get better exit? Anyway, they talk about EB, and I think that's exit balance. Justice says, it's really sad that this sport is primarily about beating teammates rather than beating other teams. Is it? I think if you look at the history of the sport, some of the great Grand Prix races and what the fans acclaim as the great races are the races between the teammates, because it's the only racing really where they're on equal terms, because it's the guy who's in the same car as you. And so a lot of people would say, oh yeah, that year of 55, Fangio versus Moss in the Mercedes was brilliant year. Only about 9 cars in every race, and they dominated the season. But it was pretty good racing between Moss and Fangio. Same with 1986-87 with Mansell and Piquet. Williams, Honda, pretty good. Everybody else, where are you? But the racing between those two made that season, those 2 seasons. Same in 88, Prost, Senna. I don't know of any Formula One fans who would say, oh, 88 was really boring. McLaren just won everything. They all say, oh, wow, Prost, Senna, what a year. So you're saying it's sad that sport is primarily about beating teammates. I don't think that's sad. I think it's just part of the sport. Because Formula One requires every team to design and build its own cars, it's logical that the best racing will be between the 2 teammates of every team, because they're the only ones in the same cars. That's always been the case. There's a lot of chat going on here between... So Daniel Gold says, and I think it's a good way for me to end the live stream as well, says, bye Peter, it's late, time for bed. Thanks for the live stream, and thank you very much. Jad Burberry says, hi Peter, I don't hear you much comment on Michael Schumacher, and you skipped that period by reaching Senna. Any reasons? I mentioned Michael quite a lot today, actually, and there's no reason. If you think I was deliberately skipping him, it's not. And there's no reason. I've always had massive respect for Michael as a racing driver, and have made the point several times on these live streams that he was the first driver to perfect the use of left foot braking combined with upshifts in mid corner with paddle shift, and he did that really well, something that Nico Rosberg then did even better, perhaps with the better technology at Mercedes. But Michael was the guy that pioneered that, in my view. And beyond that, his general approach to racing, his ability, his short corners, his softness, his suppleness, his general athleticism, and his global footprint were brilliant. So I hope that's made up. I am a huge Michael fan. I'm a big Mick fan as well. Anyway, Sean Coogan says, Jordan Formula One team, thoughts on the history? Well, if it wasn't for Jordan, we wouldn't have Aston Martin now. That's my thoughts on the history. Good old Eddie Jordan. And if it wasn't for Eddie, we wouldn't have Michael Schumacher, you could possibly argue as well. And we wouldn't have had a lot of laughs as well. So Jordan, yeah, pretty good. So there we go. Thank you very much again for joining this, being part of the live stream. I'll try and do another one maybe a bit later next week, possibly in the build-up to Miami. One's come about John Surtees. I better get this one. Brandon Hollis. Hi, Peter. I know Surtees was a champion on 2 and 4 wheels and D Hill got his start on bikes. Do you think there are transferable skills between the two disciplines in terms of driving style? I'm not convinced. I'm still kind of swayed by the LGK Setright argument in Car Magazine circa 1974, column thereof, when he wrote that there's no way the two can ever be compared, because even if you're being very, very lenient towards the bikers, the most they're going to be able to lean the bike over is 50 degrees, not 60 even, it's 50 degrees. And if 45 degrees is 1G, 50 degree is going to be 1.2G. And we're talking 4.5G with Formula One and different movement and all the rest of it. So I've always thought, well, he's probably right in a way. And it is about rails. It's not really about, short cornering or anything like that. So it's just incredibly precise use of a line, isn't it? Bikes. I think. I don't know much about it, really. I never really talked to Mike Hailwood enough about it. But I got the impression from Mike that the two were completely different, always. I knew Surtees pretty well and Mike Hailwood very well. And they just seemed to think, oh, well, I did bikes, now I'm in Formula One. It's a totally different thing. Carlos Reutemann always said that the nearest thing to Grand Prix racing was downhill skiing, and then slalom skiing as the second, and then rallying as the third. And I often said to him, bikes, and he looked at me as if, bikes, got to be joking. So there you go. It's not to say that X, yeah, we've got someone here, America's Choice, mentioning Jackie X, bikes. Bikes, obviously, Michael Schumacher liked bikes, and I think Max Verstappen would be very quick on a bike, but I don't think necessarily it means that a great bike racer is going to be able to do an immediate transfer to Grand Prix racing. I'd like to think that Sebastian Loeb would be a better transfer between what the skills he has and what he needs to do well in Formula One. Sam Mann, thank you, Peter, from Down Under. Amazing, very interesting. Thank you very much. And I would just finish by saying Anzac Day, April 25. Hats off, respect to all those who lost their lives and gave their lives in Anzac Day. I grew up in Australia and I know how much Anzac Day still means to all the Australians. And I was lucky enough to go one year with Mark and Anne Webber to Gallipoli and watch we didn't get there for the sunrise like the Australian cricket team, but we got there pretty soon afterwards. And I was oddly struck by the beauty of the place. And I say oddly because you don't imagine it's so beautiful, but it is. It's a wonderfully beautiful part of the world, but horrendous catastrophe there. And Anzac Day is always something that we remember. Anyway, thank you again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments. Sorry if I didn't get round to them. I'll try and do another live stream again in the near future, certainly before Miami if I can. And in the meantime, have a great weekend. Thanks to Jetcraft. Thanks to Pitbox. You stay safe. Now I'm just going to find my ending. There we go. Stay safe. Back to Peter. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon.